He called her a confused old woman while he secretly drained the life savings set aside for his own ailing grandmother. He saw his mother, Eleanor, as a nuisance, an obstacle to an inheritance he believed was already his. He never imagined that for the past 40 years, his mother's best friend wasn't just the woman from her book club. She was the family court judge who could freeze every last dollar he had. Have you ever had your deepest concerns dismissed as overreacting? Have you been made to feel invisible in a crisis you were the first to see? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and speaking a hard, necessary truth? This is not a channel about forgiveness. This is a channel about consequences. We are here to document the moment the bill comes due. Stay with us and witness the full, ruinous cost of disrespect. Eleanor's life was one of quiet, dignified order. At 70, she found purpose not in grand gestures, but in the meticulous care of the things that mattered. Most important was the care of her own 92-year-old mother, Margaret, now a frail whisper of a woman resting in a high-end nursing facility. Margaret's mind had faded, but her comfort was Eleanor's sacred duty. The Margaret Fund, as Eleanor called it, was the cornerstone of this duty, a substantial nest egg built over a lifetime of prudent saving, now earmarked for the crushing month-over-month expense of round-the-clock specialized care. Every transaction was logged in a leather-bound book, every penny accounted for. It was a final act of love for her mother and a fortress against the anxieties of old age. Her son Mark saw the world differently. At 45, he was all slick charm and casual ambition, dressed in clothes that cost more than Eleanor's monthly mortgage payment. He visited her one Tuesday afternoon, kissing the air by her cheek and admiring her home as if he were inspecting it for a future sale. "Things are really taking off, Mom," he said, pacing her immaculate living room. "This new venture is a game changer. But you know how it is. Cash flow is king." Eleanor simply smiled and offered him more tea. "That's wonderful, dear. I hope it works out for you." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, Grand Thun is just sitting there. You should really put that money to work. Let it grow. Just an idea." "That money doesn't work," Eleanor stated, her voice suddenly cold. "It pays for your grandmother to live with dignity. It is not to be touched." The subject was dropped, but a seed of unease had been planted. Over the next few weeks, the signs were small, a collection of tiny, soul-crushing cuts. He'd borrow her car and return it on empty. He'd forget his wallet when they went out for a rare lunch. He started calling her at odd hours, asking confusing questions about online banking passwords, always framing it as helping her get with the times. Each instance was layered with a dismissive affection, treating her caution as the quaint foolishness of an old woman. "Don't stress about it, Mom. You know how you get when you're tired." The discovery came on a rainy Thursday. While balancing the ledger for Margaret's fund, her perfectly kept records came up short. There was a debit for $20,000. It wasn't a nursing home payment. It was a wire transfer to a company called M Corp Synergy, a consulting fee. Her blood ran cold. She called Mark immediately, her voice deliberately frail. "Mark, darling, I am so sorry to bother you, but my books aren't balancing. I see a large fee here to a company I don't recognize. I must be getting more forgetful than I thought." Mark's laugh on the other end of the line was a little too quick, a little too loud. Mom, relax. I handle that. It's an investment vehicle. High yield, very exclusive. I'm making Grand's money work for her. Don't you worry your head about the details. That's what I'm here for. He thought he had managed her. But as Eleanor hung up the phone, the last shred of doubt vanished. He was lying. Later that night, unable to sleep, she stood by her darkened kitchen window, staring out into the rain. Mark pulled up in his driveway next door, his car's Bluetooth still connected, his voice booming into the quiet night. He was talking to his wife. It was perfect. She totally bought it. Confused Old Woman is my new favorite play. Honestly, it's like taking candy from a baby. She hasn't got a clue. Another 10 grand and that down payment for the Miami condo is ours. It's not like Grand's going to miss it. His laughter cut through the darkness. In the kitchen, Eleanor stood motionless, her hand gripping the edge of the granite counter until her knuckles were white. The warmth of a lifetime of love evaporated, leaving behind a silence as cold and sharp as splintered ice. The matriarch was gone. In her place stood a creditor, and the debt had just come due.
Eleanor did not go back to bed. Sleep was a luxury for a woman at peace, and the peace in her home had been methodically dismantled. She walked from the kitchen to her small, organized office, each step measured and soundless. There were no tears. Tears were for grief, and what she felt was not sadness, but a profound and chilling clarity. It was the clarity of an auditor who had just found a fatal flaw in the system. Her son was not a disappointment. He was a liability, and liabilities are not mourned. They are managed. She sat at her mahogany desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of watermarked paper. She picked up a heavy fountain pen, its nib scratching softly in the pre-dawn stillness. At the top of the page, she wrote a single name, Catherine. Then she picked up the phone. It rang twice. A voice, warm and sharp even through the filter of sleep, answered. "Ellie? It's 4 a.m. Is everything all right?" "Kate, I need your help," Eleanor said, her voice a low, steady instrument. "Something has happened with Mark." There was a pause on the other end, then the sound of rustling sheets. Judge Catherine Mercer had known Eleanor for 45 years. They had seen each other through marriages, funerals, and the quiet triumphs of their careers. Kate knew Eleanor's every inflection, and the one she heard now was one she had never encountered before. It was the sound of a foundation cracking. "My study," Kate said, her voice now wide awake and stripped of all pleasantries. 1 hour. The air in Judge Mercer's study smelled of old books and brewed coffee. Law reviews lined the walls, a silent testament to a life spent in the service of structured consequence. Kate sat opposite Eleanor, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a yellow legal pad before her. Eleanor, poised and eerily calm, recounted the events of the last month, culminating in the overheard phone call. She repeated her son's words with the dispassionate accuracy of a court reporter. "He called me a confused old woman. He said it was like taking candy from a baby." Kate listened without interruption, her expression hardening from one of concerned friendship into the stern, analytical mask of a seasoned jurist. When Eleanor finished, she put down her pen and looked at her friend. "That isn't just theft, Ellie," Kate said, her voice laced with a cold fury. "That's felony elder fraud. The fact that the victim is his own grandmother, the DA would trample his own mother for a case this clean. What he did to your mother's trust, the emotional manipulation, he didn't just steal from you, he weaponized your love." "I am not interested in the district attorney," Eleanor stated, her voice flat. "That is a public spectacle. This is a private debt. His primary asset is his liquidity. I need that channel closed." Kate nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a request for a specific tool. He'll be expecting a confrontation, Kate strategized, her legal mind now fully engaged. A tearful phone call, an argument. He's prepared for that. He's not prepared for a surgical, silent strike on his financial lifeblood. She leaned forward. We can't have you be the one to file. He would paint you as vindictive. But the estate of Margaret has every right to protect its assets. We can file an emergency ex parte motion for a temporary injunction. It freezes everything. Bank accounts, brokerage accounts, credit lines, all of it. The motion argues that there is immediate and irreparable harm being done to a vulnerable person. It's filed without him being notified. He finds out when his world stops working. It's clean, it's brutal, and it's completely, unequivocally legal. Eleanor took a slow sip of her coffee. Who do we call? An hour later, Eleanor was back in her own study, on the phone with a litigation attorney Kate had called a piranha. He was brisk, efficient, and asked no sentimental questions. Eleanor, coached by Kate, answered his queries with the same sterile precision. And you authorize us to proceed with the motion to freeze all known assets belonging to Mark Vinson pending a full audit of the Margaret Albright Trust? The lawyer asked. Yes, proceed immediately. He is a flight risk. The rest of the day passed in a surreal quiet. Eleanor tended to her garden, pruned her roses, and paid her bills online. She moved with a purpose that felt both ancient and new. At precisely 3:45 p.m., as she was watering a pot of vibrant African violets, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She walked over and looked at the screen. A text from Mark. My debit card was just declined at the gas station. A glitch, I guess. Now the bank app says my accounts are frozen. What is going on? Is this some kind of sick joke? Call me, now! She read the message twice. His panic felt like a distant weather report from a foreign country. She watched the 3 little dots appear and disappear as he typed another, more frantic message. She put the phone down, screen side down, on the cool granite. She picked up her small brass watering can and returned to her violets. The bomb had been quietly detonated, and the shockwave had just found its target.
Mark's panic didn't stay contained in text messages for long. The financial paralysis was absolute. His credit cards ceased to function. His automatic payments for his car lease and his wife's exclusive gym membership bounced. His swaggering, confident world, built on a foundation of effortless transactions, had slammed into a wall of digital red tape. And so, predictably, he escalated. He drove to Eleanor's house, not in his sleek German sedan, but in his wife, Chloe's, SUV, the only car they had with a full tank of gas. He stormed up to the front door and began hammering on it, the sound echoing through the quiet tree-lined street. Mom, open this door. I know you're in there. My lawyer says this is your doing. What have you done? Inside, Eleanor sat calmly in her favorite armchair, a book open on her lap, a cup of chamomile tea steaming beside her. She watched the front door shutter under the force of his blows. She did not move. He was playing out his scene just as Catherine had predicted. He was loud, accusatory, and publicly positioning himself as the victim of an irrational act. He was building his narrative. After 10 minutes of unanswered pounding, Mark retreated. But the siege had merely moved to a different front. 2 hours later, an email landed in Eleanor's inbox. The sender was Mark, but he had copied a sprawling list of recipients, aunts, uncles, cousins, even Chloe's parents. The subject line was stark. Urgent. Concern for my mother's mental state. The email was a masterpiece of manipulative fiction. It painted a picture of a loving son worried sick about his elderly mother. It spoke of her increasing confusion, her episodes of paranoia,
and her susceptibility to manipulation by outside influences. He mentioned a recent bizarre financial obsession and his attempts to gently guide her toward professional help. The freezing of his account, he explained, was the tragic culmination of this decline, a cry for help from a mind in turmoil. He ended by asking the family for their prayers and support during this terribly difficult time. He had turned her prudent self-defense into a public spectacle of senility. Eleanor read the email, her expression unchanging. She forwarded it without comment to Catherine Mercer. The response from Judge Mercer was immediate and consisted of only 4 words. Let him build his gallows. Eleanor understood perfectly. Mark believed the battle was being fought in the court of public opinion, a space where sentiment and gossip held sway. He was wrong. The true battle was one of documentation and law, and in that arena, he was hopelessly outmatched. Her countermove was silent, precise, and devastating. Acting on Catherine's advice, Eleanor didn't reply to the family-wide email. She didn't defend herself. Instead, she opened her laptop and composed a single, separate email. It was addressed to one person, Uncle Stephen, her late husband's older brother, the undisputed patriarch of the family and a notoriously shrewd retired accountant. Stephen was a man who prized 2 things above all else: family honor and clean bookkeeping. The email was short. Dearest Stephen, forgive the intrusion. There has been a financial discrepancy concerning Margaret's trust fund. I have attached the last 3 months of bank statements and my corresponding ledger. Please pay special attention to the wire transfer on page 2, line 4. I would value your professional opinion. Warmly, Eleanor. She attached 2 PDFs. One was the official bank statement showing the $20,000 transfer to M Corp Synergy. The other was a scanned page from her own handwritten ledger, showing 40 years of meticulous, unbroken records of her mother's finances, with a single, jarring question mark next to the same transaction. There were no accusations, no mention of Mark, just the cold, hard data. She hit send. For the rest of the day, her phone buzzed with text from concerned relatives who had read Mark's email. Ellie, is everything okay? Let us know if you need anything. Mark is so worried about you. Eleanor answered each one with the same polite, placid response. Thank you for your concern. I am fine. The narrative war was being waged all around her, a storm of whispers and worried phone calls. But Eleanor and Catherine had already moved their forces to higher ground. They had bypassed the noise and gone directly to the one person who could silence it. The power was shifting, not through a dramatic confrontation, but through the quiet, inexorable force of an auditor's report hitting a patriarch's desk. The public flying job had been met with a single tactical strike of undeniable truth. And now all Eleanor had to do was wait for the fallout.
The fallout from Eleanor's email to Uncle Stephen was not a bomb, it was a contagion. It started with a single phone call from Stephen to Mark, a conversation Mark would later describe to his wife as a 10-minute vivisection. Stephen, the stoic family accountant, asked no questions about Eleanor's mental health. He asked only about a wire transfer, a shell corporation, and the definition of fiduciary duty.
Mark, accustomed to the soft terrain of emotional manipulation, was utterly unprepared for the hard, unforgiving ground of a financial audit. He fumbled, he blustered, he lied. And Stephen, who could spot a cooked book from 100 paces, heard every lie for what it was. That was the beginning of the gauntlet of fools, the series of desperate, clumsy counterattacks that only served to reveal the poverty of Mark's character. Each one was met not by Eleanor's anger, but by a quiet, intelligent defense that left him more entangled than before. The first attempt was the depraved gambit. Chloe, Mark's wife, arrived at Eleanor's door one afternoon, clutching a framed photo of their 2 young children. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Her performance of a worried daughter-in-law was flawless. "Eleanor, please," she began, her voice cracking. "Think of the children. Their savings accounts were tied to Mark's, their college funds. It's all frozen. Whatever's going on between you and Mark, you can't punish your own grandchildren. It isn't fair to them." Eleanor looked from Chloe's tear-streaked face to the photo of her smiling grandchildren. A year ago, this plea would have shattered her. Now she simply felt a weary sadness for them. Catherine had warned her this was coming. "Chloe," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but unwavering, "I opened separate custodial accounts for the children at a different bank the day they were born. I have been depositing money into them on every birthday and holiday for 12 years. Your children's college funds are untouched, uninsured by the FDIC, and completely insulated from their father's financial mismanagement. You needn't worry about their future. It's their present that seems to be the problem." Chloe's performance faltered. The tears stopped. A flicker of cold calculation appeared in her eyes before she snatched the photo from the table and left without another word. The first attack had been neutralized by simple foresight. Next came the enabler attack. Mark dispatched his younger sister Sarah, a woman who would spend her life coasting in her brother's wake, benefiting from his charm and turning a blind eye to his faults. Sarah cornered Eleanor after church, her expression a careful blend of sorrow and sibling loyalty. "Ellie, I know Mark can be a lot," I sighed, twisting a handkerchief in her hands, "but he's not a monster. This whole thing has broken him. He made a bad investment, that's all. It was for the family. Freezing him out like this, it's so cruel. Can't you just show a little grace?" Eleanor looked at her sister-in-law, a woman she had known for 40 years. She had always known Sarah chose willful ignorance over uncomfortable truths. Catherine had provided the tool for this encounter, too. "Grace," Eleanor repeated softly. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. It was a printout of a receipt. "Last year, Mark took you on a weekend trip to Napa. He told you it was a bonus from his company." She unfolded the paper. It was the hotel bill from the 5-star resort, a charge of $4,000, paid for directly from Margaret's trust account. "He didn't get a bonus, Sarah. My mother paid for your spa treatments." Sarah's face went white. She stared at the receipt as if it were a snake. She had been a beneficiary of the fraud. Her position as a neutral party had been vaporized by a single piece of damning evidence. She crumpled the handkerchief in her fist and hurried away, a collaborator exposed. The final failure was the apology. A week into his financial exile, a broken Mark appeared on Eleanor's doorstep again. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed, pathetic desperation. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry. I was stupid. I was arrogant. I made a terrible mistake. And I'll pay it all back, I promise. Just please, call this off. You've made your point. I'm ruined." He began to cry, real gulping sobs of a man who had finally hit rock bottom. Eleanor watched him. This was the most dangerous moment. The performance of remorse was designed to trigger a mother's deepest instinct to forgive, to heal, to make it all better. But Eleanor was no longer playing the part of his mother. She was playing the role of a creditor, settling a debt. "The point, Mark," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion, "has not been made. The point will be made by Judge Mercer at the probate court hearing next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Your lawyers were notified this morning." She closed the door, shutting out the sound of his weeping. The gauntlet was over. Each of his weapons, emotional blackmail, plausible deniability, feigned remorse, had shattered against the shield of her quiet, methodical preparation. The many victories were complete. All that remained was the final public reckoning.
The probate court was a sterile, impersonal theater. It was a room of muted grays and browns, designed to strip away emotion and leave only the stark architecture of fact and law. Mark sat hunched beside his lawyer, his expensive suit now looking like a costume on a man who had shrunk inside it. He had the pallor of someone who hadn't slept in a week, his face a mask of anxious dread. Eleanor sat on the opposite side of the aisle, a portrait of serene composure. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her silver hair coiled neatly at the nape of her neck. She looked not like a victim, but like a board member attending a necessary but unpleasant meeting. Beside her, Uncle Stephen sat ramrod straight, his presence a silent, damning indictment. At precisely 10 a.m., Judge Catherine Mercer entered the courtroom. She ascended the bench, her black robes flowing around her, transforming her from Eleanor's friend into an instrument of the state. She looked out over the room, her gaze resting for a fraction of a second longer on Eleanor before moving on, her expression unreadable. This was the scene from the thumbnail. The confrontation triangle was complete. The shocked antagonist, the resolved matriarch, and the unimpeachable human weapon presiding over it all. The proceedings were a brutal exercise in procedural demolition. The lawyer for Margaret's estate, the piranha Eleanor had hired, laid out the case with cold surgical precision. He presented the doctored bank statements, the evidence of the Shell Corporation, and the expert testimony of Uncle Stephen, who methodically dismantled Mark's investment as a clear case of fraudulent conversion. Mark's lawyer tried to fight back, attempting to frame the issue as a family misunderstanding. "Your Honor," he pleaded, "my client acted rashly, perhaps, but with the intent of benefiting his grandmother's estate. This is a private family matter that has been escalated unnecessarily." Catherine peered down from the bench, her voice cutting through the room like a shard of ice. "Counselor, the moment your client created a fictitious corporation to siphon $20,000 from the trust fund of a 92-year-old woman with dementia, it ceased to be a private family matter. It became a textbook case of elder fraud. Are you suggesting the court should treat fraud differently when it's committed against one's own relatives?" The lawyer sat down, defeated. The final reckoning was not a shout, but a series of quiet, devastating orders read into the record by Judge Mercer. "This court finds that Mark Vinson has willfully and maliciously misappropriated funds from the estate of Margaret Albright," Catherine declared, her voice resonating with the full authority of the law.
Therefore, this court orders that all legal and administrative authority for the estate of Margaret Albright be transferred exclusively to her daughter, Eleanor Vinson. Mr. Vinson is to have no contact, financial or otherwise, with the estate or its beneficiary. Mark's face crumpled. It was total annihilation. He wasn't just ruined. He had been legally erased from his family's financial existence. His own mother, the woman he had dismissed as a confused relic, now held the power to garnish his wages for the rest of his life if she so chose. The collapse was immediate and pathetic. After the hearing, Eleanor received one final garbled text from him. "You destroyed me. I have nothing left. I hope you are happy." Back in the quiet of her study, Eleanor looked at the message. With a steady hand, she tapped the screen, blocked his number, and then deleted the entire conversation thread. The last digital trace of her son's claim on her life was gone. The ledger at last was balanced. The checkmate was undeniable. The final severance was complete.
Eleanor's new life began not with a grand celebration, but with the quiet, satisfying act of changing her mother's address with the post office. She sold the large family home, the one filled with the ghosts of a life that no longer existed. The sale was quick, finalized by a brisk professional agent who knew nothing of the home's history, and Eleanor felt a profound sense of relief as she signed the last keeper. She had not sold a house. She had dismantled a mausoleum. Her new sanctuary was a small but elegant condominium on the other side of town, in a quiet building overlooking a park. It was bright, airy, and filled with sunlight. The rooms smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings, not of lemon polish and old memories. For the first time in years, she felt like she was living in her own space, not curating a museum of someone else's past. Her life was finally, wholly her own. Her found community arrived in unexpected ways. She joined a pottery class at the local arts center, a lifelong curiosity she had never had time to indulge. There, amidst the messy, wonderful chaos of clay and spinning wheels, she met a woman named Maria, a retired literature professor with a wicked sense of humor and hands perpetually stained with terracotta. Maria knew nothing of Eleanor's past battle. She only knew her as the woman who made surprisingly elegant, if slightly lopsided, vases. They would get coffee after class, talking for hours about books, art, and the quiet absurdities of life. For Eleanor, a friendship that demanded nothing but her presence felt like a miracle. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor was sitting on her new balcony reading a book when her phone rang. It was Catherine. "I have some news," the judge said, her voice holding a professional neutrality that barely concealed the satisfaction beneath. "The forensic audit is complete. With the sale of Mark's car and the seizure of his brokerage account, Margaret's trust has been made whole, plus damages. He'll be paying a court-mandated restitution fee for the next 10 years. Eleanor listened, taking a slow sip of her tea. "And Mark?" "His wife left him," Catherine said, the facts laid out like stones. "Filed for divorce a week after her credit cards were canceled. He's living in a rented room downtown, working 2 jobs, one as a barista. It seems a confused old woman now owns everything he once had." There was no triumph in Eleanor's heart, only a quiet, somber peace. The debt was settled. The storm had passed.
Looking out over the park, watching the golden leaves drift down from the trees, she felt a sense of profound and lasting calm. She had navigated the storm not by fighting it head on, but by becoming a force of nature more powerful, more patient, and more unforgiving than the tempest itself. Her new life wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future on a foundation she, and she alone, had laid.